Well, Peter Hansen, firstly, thank you for inviting us to see your incredible collection, of which we've had a wonderful tour earlier today. And I suppose we should start with the obvious question. How did you first become a collector?
I actually became a collector when I was a kid in Biker. My parents were quite innovative, and we were kind of the hoi polloi of Biker, if there is such a thing. We used to have lodges when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So, by the time I was 5, I could cook a breakfast, and then, I used to get sixpence a week for helping out with the lodges and stuff like that. So, the two favourite comics I had were Topper and Beezer, and I couldn't buy them quite for sixpence a week.
No.
So, what I used to do was, I used to get the BEANO and the Dandy, and then I'd read them, and then I'd go around my mates and rent them out for a halfpenny for three days.
Yeah.
And I was a pretty big kid, so I didn't have much problem getting it back. And then I used to go and spend the extra money on the Beezer and the Topper.
Right.
So I was always into comics.
And did you continue collecting it from then onwards, or
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I always kept my comics back then when I was a kid.
You spoke earlier. You said you moved around the world quite a lot.
I lived in 16 different places by the time I was 16.
Gosh, including Singapore.
Singapore, Wales, half a dozen places in Newcastle, 4 places in Wales, Singapore, and then my 16th birthday I was in Diggs.
Yeah.
In Jasmine.
Yeah. Working in as an engineer or
apprentice.
Engineer.
I was an
Apprentice engineer.
Yeah. Swan Hunters.
Yeah, Swan Hunters, and from there you progressed to owning your own company.
I did, yeah.
I am shorthanding this, obviously.
Yeah.
This is right. Condensing your career into 2 lines seems a bit ridiculous, because it sounds like an incredible life. Of the places you've lived in, is there any particular that you keep coming back to?
Wales.
Wales, yeah.
Yeah. That period was very stable. Although we lived in different places, my dad never settled, and that was quite stable for me then.
Yeah. Yeah, I can empathise with that, because my family moved around quite a bit as a Vickers family. So you've been collecting for how many years now?
Well, I kind of stopped collecting when we went to Singapore. I was about 13.
Right.
And I shoved everything in my granny's attic and took off. And actually, there's a guy in Singapore that I only heard about. I never actually caught up with, but one of the teachers was selling old American comics in the school to the kids, and actually shipping them back to the UK, called Ron Bennett.
Right.
And Ron Bennett actually had a line on a place in Singapore where tons and tons of old DC and Marvel had been shipped. So he was selling them through the fanzines, actually, in the early days, because he went there about 1967, I think. And he made a few pennies on the side, but I never really connected with him, even though I bought DC comics before I went over to Singapore. I was too interested in chasing girls and playing sport and doing other things.
As you do.
As you do. And then, as I said, when the school changed from an army or forces school to an independent school, at the end of the 5th year I came home and left my dad and mum in Singapore, and my sister, my younger sister, and came back. And then I didn't look at comics until I was probably just met Jill, so I would have been 18. And I used to have to get 2 buses from work to get to where we lived. and the first bus stopped outside of Central Station in Newcastle, and there's a place called Pink Lane when you walk across the road from the station. And Pink Lane is just like an alley, really. And at the top of this alley one day, there was this comic shop, about 1973, maybe 74, late 73. Anyway, DC comics taped in the window, old ones, not recent ones, but ones from the early 60s and stuff. And it was bizarrely run by two old people, and I mean people at that time that were probably in their 50s, so husband and wife. And when you went inside, there was just boxes of comics. So I started buying DC comics again, and occasionally, a little later on when I got to uni, the guys from Viz were doing the Rag Mag.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were nut jobs. You know, they were really pretty out there.
Yeah.
And they actually pulled the plug on them and said, no, enough's enough, you know, this is just over the top. And I think they pulled the plug on them. And then the next thing, you know, Viz came out a couple of years later.
Yeah.
Probably not even 2 years later.
Yeah, talking sort of early 80s.
Early 80s, yeah. I was there 81, 82.
Yeah.
And they were doing the Rag Mag at the time.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that origin of Viz, because they started doing it in the garden shed, and I think sort of the guys now sort of seem to still work from sheds, but
yeah, no, well they may not have been doing it, but they were certainly involved in the Rag Mag.
So so what from collecting comics, how were you also collecting other things at the time, or
yeah, bits and bobs that I saw, you know, if I was at a mart, or if I was you know, I used to go to jumble sales and stuff like that, you know, pick bits and bobs up at the time.
Just like people now go to car boots and things like that. Yeah, sure.
But my wife, when I first started buying the American comics, I used to hide them under the bed because, you know, I didn't want her to know that this, I mean, longish hair and beard, and I didn't want her to know that this 6'3" guy was reading comics, and so I was hiding them under the bed. She did find them eventually. And just shook her head, and I said, well, it could have been Mayfair or something, you know, you'd been more upset with that. So she was okay with it, and you know, she said, and I was never a big drinker, really, and I was a what I call a bum smoker, because I used to bum them off people, you know, I never bought them if I could help it. And she said, well, you know, you don't drink, you don't smoke, and you don't chase loose women, so this is better than that, so you can keep on getting comics.
When did you start collecting art in a major way? Because your collection encompasses art as well as comics. And
I think the Gifford auction.
Which was in
2000, and I've got the catalogues up in there. 2000 and I can't remember if it was 2002. I think it was 2002.
So early 2000s then, and that's the beginning of your art collection.
Yeah.
Generally, and were there particular artists that even then that you were looking at collecting, or whose examples of their art that you were particularly interested in?
Bellamy was right up there, and Kennedy, because I read Thompson and IPC. So, yeah, definitely those two. And it was always Don Lawrence, because Carl the Viking was my favourite strip of all time.
Right.
It just, and the Bellamy Heros, the Spartan, I just like historical stuff. You know, I really just like the historical stuff. Heros
is obviously a particular favourite, but there are other artists.
Oh yeah, Ron Turner, brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous. Wish I had more.
And names that people might escape a lot of collectors or fans today that people don't do a double take when you mention their names, because some of the art you showed us was, people I haven't heard of some of the artists, which I will be honest and admit, but they are absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, there's a lot of artists. I mean, I'd always been a humour fan as well, because when I was reading the BEANO and the Dandy, I mean, people like Baxendale and Ken Reid stuck out, but also there's other artists there that stuck out, Hugh McNeil, and people like that. Dennis McLaughlin, absolutely.
And a European artist as well.
Yes.
Giovanni.
Yeah. There's a lot of them. Mendoza. I mean, that thing by Mendoza, when I picked up that English paper comic, I was just like, what? I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah. Other stories have come with it as well, and you've assembled quite your knowledge of the comics industry, or the British comics industry, perhaps unrivaled amongst people, because you've got the paperwork to support some of the material that's come, things that accidentally come along with some artwork, letters and things like that. So,
well, I got a lot of help, particularly with DC Thompson from Bill Ritchie. Bill Ritchie was kind of a mentor.
He was a collector and an artist.
He was a collector and an artist. Yeah. He worked for DC Thompson for 40 years, I think, from 1950 to 15, 16, 17, 18. Yeah, he worked for them for over nearly 50 years, and they laid him off the year before he got his gold watch.
Dear.
Made him redundant.
Oh,
and then hired him back as a freelance.
Yeah, that's the modern way. Collected. Is there something that you're still trying to get an example of that you've yet to track down, or are you content in the?
I can't think of any. I mean, I'm always looking for examples of artists I don't have. I can't think of any major artists that I don't have, whether it's artists from the past or from the present. Brian Bond, Dave Gibbons, people like that. I can't think of any major ones that I don't have.
Yeah, I was just wondering if something that had come your way had suddenly sparked you to think, I need to find out more about this. For example, some of the paperwork from the history of IPC in a way that sort of like thinking, like for example, you showed us half a letter that sort of like fascinated. Where did the other bit go?
Where did it go?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you pick stuff up and it's like that, I think what had happened was the staple had rotted away at the top.
Yeah.
And it had kind of pulled it away when somebody was looking at it or something. But yeah.
I noticed. You say we were just staggered by just the sheer range of material and the dedication to which you got clearly to the love of the industry.
Yeah.
But what you've got is some of the things that, for example, books containing the advertising that went with the comics, and that's something that I don't think anybody else has that sort of material. So to you, does that represent as much of the comics industry as the comics themselves?
It does, yeah, because it's an industry, and it's got a lot of facets to it. So if you find out something that you didn't know, it's a bonus. And when you find out how the advertising department actually went out there, and if you look through these, they actually had adverts on the telly, and they put that in the ad, and say, watch out for our ad for this new comic. Usually after Mother's Hour or something, there'd be other Thunderbirds and other things like that on. And so they'd say, watch out after Mother's Hour for our ads for this and stuff like that.
Some of those seem to be a bit of a holy grail. Those actual TV ads seem to have just disappeared, or you'll find some on YouTube, for example, quite, just be posted by fans, but there are a lot that nobody vaguely remembers, like the advert for TV21 now, but nobody's got a copy of it. It seems to just disappeared. Even more ephemeral than the comics that they...
Yeah, they are. And I mean, that's an archive that, had it been saved, would have been fascinating now. Because that was what impacted kids and made them run out and buy TV21.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there was no other way to get to the kids, really, apart from sticking a flyer in a comic and saying next week TV21's coming out.
Or the posters outside the newsagent, which you've got a few rare examples of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've also discovered things like, for example, we've talked about Mickey Mouse comic before the Second World War, and the fact you discovered that, contrary to how people perceive that title, a lot of it was actually created in the UK. It was created by British creators, which is something that you wouldn't know unless you pursued them to.
Yeah, and that's true. And it's odd with the guy that we spoke about, because Whitaker went on to have a very successful career as an animator, and I don't know if he was embarrassed for the fact that he actually drew for comics. I don't know, but I've never seen anything in his biography that, when I've tried to track down anything about it, that he actually says that, yeah, I worked in Mickey Mouse Weekly doing Disney stuff.
Incredible, wasn't it?
But
there are artists. So, for example, there was the Shirley Bellwood who worked on Misty, for example. She had no interest in the comics work she did, and yet people hold her work in high esteem. And
they do.
Very little left survived. And short of what her next door neighbour told me he had, there was like nothing, very little else. And obviously, you're very keen that your collection is seen in some way. Obviously, you very kindly loaned out pieces of art to the travelling exhibition that's currently doing the rounds via the 7 Stories.
Yes, and then there's going to be more of it in the exhibition museum when they reopen.
Brilliant.
And then there's going to be stuff that David Roach is putting in his book. So yeah, I mean, I want people to see it.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to look on a paper and think, wow, that's great, but when you actually see that full size,
yes,
it's staggering.
Yeah.
And if anybody says that these guys weren't artists, then they're just nuts, because they put some of these guys were working 6 days a week doing this stuff. And I know for a fact Ken Reid used to work 7 days a week because he had that much stuff on the go.
Yeah, juggling so many strips in one go. And what are your hopes for this archive of the British comics industry? What are your hopes for it as a collection? What would you like to see happen?
I would like to see it saved for the nation. I don't know if you can get the Getty Museum or somehow to stump up. They seem to like saving British things, and I don't know, they'd be terribly interested in the British comic industry, but I'd like to see it saved for the nation for sure. I would like to see it available as an archive going forward, because it's a story that goes right through the world wars and right through the what I believe is the golden age, which is kind of 1950 to 1975, and then after that it was a big struggle, and had a huge impact on people in those days.
Yeah,
as a
it's
kid,
a social document.
It's a social document, yeah, and I think it talked about what was going on and what was funny and what was on the telly and what was this and what was that, and I just think that it should be saved for the nation, because you can look back and say, well, why were they buying 1.2 million? And at one point, the Dandy, not the BEANO, the Dandy hit 2 million. why was everybody buying this?
Yeah. What was it that week that?
Yeah. Who knows? But I mean, it was a social commentary as well of what was going on.
Yeah. I mean, all the strips, they change over time. And the BEANO is the obvious example of how it even now reflects the society we live in today, and it always has changed to adapt. You know, from the way that some people would like to remember the BEANO is long gone because the world has moved on. The times have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But it's still resonating with the kids in the way that they're presenting it now. They might not be selling 1 million copies, but
no, they are. But then again, they've expanded into television and into animation and that sort of thing. So they've recognised the change itself. So the characters live on. So hopefully your collection will in some way as well.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, as you know, there's things in there that don't paint the comic book companies in a glorious light, but it's all, you know, you've got to take the rough with the smooth.
Warts and all.
Yeah, warts and all.
Warts and all. Thank you. For example, girls' comics seem totally undervalued by a lot of comics fans, and yet they outsold boys' comics regularly. There seems to be consistently so outsold girls' comics, and the artists and the art that's in those, to me, in many ways, it outshines a lot of the boys' comics work. The sense of character, for example, they were telling them. I think you mentioned this before, that you feel the characters and the stories are a lot more complex, and there's more about the character. They're more character driven, aren't they?
They are. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the boys' comics, of course, was war, humour, sport. Whereas the girls' comics are typically ponies and horses and romance and relationships and a lot more complex than the boys' comics. Not so much of the humour strips. You know, you might get 1 or 2 humour strips, and even then maybe only half a page or 1 page in the girls' comics. But and they did that right through, you know, from pre-teen to teenage, where suddenly you're into the romance comics and, you know, kind of grooming them to be adults in that world. And they're totally different, and the artwork is in general much more straight artwork than a lot of the boys' comics, which had, you know, quite a few humour strips in them usually, and yeah, just a lot more sophisticated. And I think it's totally and utterly undervalued. You know, not just the artwork, but the scripting and the writing.
The sheer amount of work that went into it. You know, from, even developing the names of the comic and the long lists that they had for possible comic titles and things like that. It's staggering. I mean, the idea that one of the lists you showed us earlier, of the number of titles, that girls' names they literally went through, that could potentially have been a girls' comic. You know, they could have been still doing them now.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's really. I think it's really important that girls' comics get recognised for how good they are, and the artists for how good they are, and the work that they did. And it's quite funny because when you look at it, the guys that were working, and it was mostly men drawing the artwork. There was, as you saw, a few women that were really, really good. And those men that were drawing the artwork basically stayed in girls' comics.
Yeah.
They didn't
move out.
They didn't transfer across to the boys' comics. They were obviously more than capable of doing that. I just don't know if drawing war stories and sports stories and stuff like that really, you know, was what they wanted to do. You know, maybe they were more comfortable doing the kind of stories that they were doing in the girls' comics.
Yeah, perhaps they were. Well, hopefully this sort of thing might prompt people to find out more about it and come back with some answers if they remember the period when they were out, when those girls' comics were so popular.
Well, yes, and I mean, it would be great to actually find out more about the people that were involved with the girls' comics. You know, there's still a dearth of information about girls' comics in comparison to boys' comics. And particularly the Thompson girls' comics. You know, I mean, people like David Roach are, you know, he's like a dog with a bone. If you give him a sniff of, you know, this is so-and-so, he'll pick it out in all of these other comics quite easily, and you know, attribute the strips to the artist that was first pointed out to him. You know, so you need more people like David getting leads on who these artists are, and then giving up his very precious time to go through it, and put the names to the faces.
Perhaps your collection needs to be digitised so more people can have a look at it. Well, it won't take them very long to do that.
How many years?
How many years? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting for sure. But yeah, it would be nice. I mean, one of the things that I would like to see happen if the comics were actually eventually, you know, put somewhere where people can see them, or they can be digitized, because in the long term you're not going to be able to hang on to them.
No.
So, you know, they have to be digitized at some point. And, you know, the institutions, I don't know if they'd be able to get the money to digitize things, you know, like that for the nation, but it would be nice to think that it could be done. And maybe if the remuneration was in the right range, some of it might go back to them to help them with the digitization. You know?